It's a privilege and a great joy to be back in Naarm on Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung land. This is a place where I've lived for many years doing harm reduction, but I'm now based on Ngunnawal and Ngambri land in Canberra. I am so excited to be here with community leaders in the festival harm reduction space. It's going to feel a little bit like speed dating because we're going to try and get through as many states and territories within the 30 minutes. If you can, use the QR code that will give you links to all of the websites and the resources from the people that are speaking today. And you can also get this map which shows what wins in the harm reduction space and festivals there are by state and territory. So my name is Steph Tzanetis. I am the Workforce Development Lead at Penington Institute and a Karma Peer Educator at CanTest. I led Pill Testing Australia's festival-based pilots in 2018 and 19 and was DanceWize Program Lead at Harm Reduction Victoria from 2013 to 21. It is my great pleasure to be introducing my friend and colleague who is the current Harm Reduction Victoria DanceWize Program Lead, Nick Wallis. Nick Wallis has been in the DanceWize team for more than a decade. Nick is a broadcaster and drug law reform advocate with a long background in community and commercial radio. He's produced a weekly show in psychedelia on Melbourne's community radio 3CR. He moved from an intrigued online psychonaut to an active community member attending his first Entheogenesis Australia's conference in the late 2000s. Nick has worked on drug issues with the Eros Association and he's ran for Parliament in Victoria 3 times with the Sex Party and was heavily involved in the development of early drug policy. Nick, tell us about the wins in Victoria.
Thank you very much, Steph. That last party was legalised cannabis because Australian Sex Party ended. Anyway, good morning all. Thanks for coming along. Just on the, I found drugs through internet. I'm sure a lot of people around my generation might have come to things that way, and it gave me a very sort of interested perspective on finding more information before I even took any substances. And that kind of open source kind of information ethos was really like grilled into me before I'd even found local, actual existing community. So I want to talk to you about DanceWize and its predecessor / the same program with a different name, Rave Safe, which began as very much a grassroots program in the mid-90s. And when I say grassroots, I do have a handout that's going to come around probably in about 10 minutes. These handouts are photocopied, like they were photocopies of photocopies. They were handed out by just people who were out partying at parties, and that's how this sort of began. That was in the mid-90s. Up until the late 90s, it was still just a grassroots program, unfunded, until it became funded under VivAID's program collective. VivAIDS is the predecessor of Harm Reduction Victoria. During the mid-2000s, there was a lot of focus around raves and that term rave being associated a lot with drug use, and there being a lot of stigmatising and negative media attention, especially around certain events at certain venues. You can find out more about that if you have a look at that QR link. There is a 25-year retrospective that talks a little bit more about that than I can talk about in the 1 minute 30 I've got to go. But basically the word rave got really heavily stigmatised, and there were promoters saying, we're not going to have an organisation here that has the word rave in it. So we changed the name to DanceWize, and then it was all okay. It's all this kind of a bit silly game of, pretending that nobody takes drugs, which I see movement away from, but then sometimes you see movement back towards. I've been involved with DanceWize for about the past decade, and in that time I've seen the program grow from a program that we had our resources, we were going out to parties, but it was a much smaller program when I first came on. And during Steph's time as the coordinator, it expanded out. We did our most ever amount of festivals. We were almost at a festival every weekend, I think 2017. And we also expanded out by starting to reach out to friends in other states, which you'll hear from here, and also developing other aspects to our program. So building on our resources, building on our our education delivery, our team training, and also then building extra components to the service, including a gender-based violence service, which came along in the fairly recently, sort of during lockdown. So massive growth over that time, big collaboration. We're going to hear from some of the other people now. Check that link out for more, though.
Thank you so much, Nick. So harm reduction in Victoria since about the mid-90s. There were other rave-safe groups in South Australia, Queensland and New South Wales. I'm grateful to a friend, Chris Knowling, who is a volunteer for Rave Safe South Australia, and some of the links through the QR code are archived websites where you can see some online forums, because in the early days, these programs and their establishment were closely connected with the early days of the internet. And as Nick mentioned, with the gender-based violence program that came out of Harm Reduction Victoria's DanceWize program, that actually your colleague May Vincent was a representative on Penington Institute's advisory group and created a sexual health and safety toolkit. You can download it from that QR code, or there's some copies among the resources on the tables at the back. But now we are moving to Queensland. Around 2014 we're at in terms of our timeline, and we're going to speak with Brooke Walters from the ConsciousNest. So Brooke is the founder of the Grassroots Festival Harm Reduction and Support Service ConsciousNest, which she's been running without government funding since 2014. So I'm not sure if there's any funders in the audience, but there we go. She has also been the project coordinator of High Ground at Quinn and an employee of the Loop Australia. Brooke is a social worker, a harm reduction educator, an art therapist, events coordinator, and peer. She is passionate about creating innovative harm reduction approaches to education and support that are colourful, fun, engaging, and progressive. Brooke, please come tell us about what's going on in Queensland.
Thank you, Steph. So my name's Brooke, and I've been running a grassroots community harm reduction service at festivals. Well, they're raves, and my journey began as a rave events coordinator. I was living in Montreal. I was in my early 20s. I joined a sound system crew, and it was here in this space I started to recognise the need for support around drug use, mental health, and harm reduction education. So I did a little bit of brainstorming and realised we were actually in the perfect place to facilitate this ourselves. So we started running safe spaces, setting up little booths to do reagent drug testing, and then I came back home to Australia in 2015, brought the project back with me, and I started banging on the doors of a lot of the old festival organiser networks that I had, begging me to let me do an info kiosk or a safe space. It was very difficult at first to find events that would say yes, as we're really heavily targeted by the police, and there was still an attitude from festival management that wasn't ready to acknowledge or put out. So they're like, we still have to pretend that drugs don't happen here. Our service, we finally were given an opportunity, and we were like shoved right at the back in the bushes. And eventually we got another festival called Earth Frequency that took us on, and that year we noted we had 256 engagements out of a festival of 5,000. So we were like, that's pretty good. No one knows what harm reduction is. We're in the middle of the bushes. And then the second year we were given a bit more budget. We were given a bit more visibility, and our numbers jumped from that 200 to 2,184. I've also watched our service change in many ways. We're often the safety away from police. We're often the counselling service for people who've had an altercation, because we all know how traumatising strip searching is. And then last year at this same festival, we calculated over 3,000 engagements and 177 hours of caring for people. These numbers show that the crowd, the peer network that we've created, people trust us, that they're interested in these practices. And the other difference with ConsciousNest is also the way that this space looks. So this is one of my major passions with the project. It's a beautiful sensory space. It's tailored for emotional regulation, engagement through play, learning and art, as well as facilitating support specifically for psychedelic experiences and other drug experiences. It's really hard to describe the space, so I highly encourage you go onto Instagram and check out our page so you can see the photos of the spaces that we're doing. But I've probably run out of a whole bunch of time, so I'm going to wrap it up and just say I hope that grassroots initiatives like the ConsciousNest continue to be in the community, as I believe they're one of the most effective ways of making positive change for people, and we're pushing the boundaries of accessible care, education, and keeping people alive, basically, at the end of the day. So.
Thank you, Brooke. And I'll just remind, if anyone's joining, you can connect with all of our speakers and check out their resources via this single QR code. So things started getting really busy and picking up pace from around 2016. So there was a development there, and I'm going to introduce Penny Hill to you. Penny is a board member of HR Vic, Harm Reduction Australia, the Vienna NGO Committee on Drugs, the IDPC's Members Advisory Council, and is the co-founder of Students for Sensible Drug Policy Australia.
Thank you, Steph. Thanks everyone for coming. I have 1 minute for this little bit, so I've written down my notes so I can keep to time. So as Steph said, I started SSDP Australia alongside a bunch of other colleagues, and we all started from the DanceWize Harm Reduction Victoria crew. So in 2015 we started the first. I was also studying at Deakin University here in Melbourne. A group of us from DanceWize realised that there was no space for young people to advocate for harm reduction and drug policy reform, and we wanted to change that, and at the time we wanted to advocate for youth voices at the local level. Around the same time, I actually came to the Harm Reduction Conference in Kuala Lumpur in 2015, and I had the opportunity to loop in with some of the International Youth Rise and SSDP International crew. When I came back to Melbourne and back to my mates here, we decided that we would in fact set up the first SSDP club at Deakin Uni. And then after we started that, we were kind of inundated with interest from students all across different Melbourne universities and in fact across the country, and we realised pretty quickly that we needed to set up SSDP at the national level. It was also around that time when we started at that national level that we joined the Stay Safe, what was called the Stay Safe Consortium at the time, and what's now called Pill Testing Australia. But that's enough from me. I'm going to come back in a second, and then in a few minutes Joe's going to take you through a little bit more of what SSDP's been doing in the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. So now we're around 2016, 2000.
Also, can I say, take a bit more time? Like, I'm meant to go on a minute, but if you guys want to take more time, please do. I'm the main speaker, and I've been given 45 minutes. You guys have take an extra 10 or 15.
All right, we're going to do it
a minute ago.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I just thought of it, and I was like, oh my God.
Thanks, Andy. And so we are going to hear from Penny again, and maybe we can say less words per minute and make it feel more like an actual conversation rather than speed dating. So we're around 2016, 2017. Things are getting very busy in the festival harm reduction space, and it is a great pleasure to be introducing Erica Franklin. Erica is the program lead of DanceWize New South Wales at the New South Wales Users and AIDS Association, or NUA, a self-identified drug user government-funded criminal. A dedicated harm reduction advocate. Her passion began when studying criminology while living in a party house in Sydney. Since then, she has organised grassroots protests, worked at the medically supervised injecting centre in Sydney's King's Cross, needle and syringe programs, and Kirkton Road Centre. She's contributed to research and provided expert peer advice to shape the government's response to drug-related deaths at music festivals. The inquiries and papers that Erica on are listed in the reference list on the QR code. Erica, tell us what's going on in the biggest state in Australia.
Thanks for that, Steph. So, DanceWize New South Wales had a very rapid history. We were funded in 2017 in July, and we did our first event in November of 2017. So a very short period of time, but we were lucky enough to have the model of DanceWize. So we had, I guess, the paperwork, the systems, and we started off with a group of just 30 people. We were wearing these terrible blue shirts that made everyone thought we were the cops, so we changed that to purple, which was one of the best choices we ever made. And we were were funded to do 10 festivals per year, focusing on Buschdorfs, unregulated spaces. But very quickly, we saw such a rapid change because over the 2018-19 festival season, there were 6 deaths that happened in a period of 6 months that had a high level of public outcry, a lot of media attention. There were grassroots protests being organised at the time, and that led to the development of the Music Festival Guidelines, which was created by the Ministry of Health, and DanceWize was a really key part of helping the development of that, which basically maps out what harm reduction best practices for music festivals. And then there was also the introduction of the Music Festival Act. So festivals that were considered high risk, which if they're over 8,000 people and have high energy or electronic dance music, would now had to get a safety management plan approved by Liquor and Gaming. Now we basically had to start meeting these new requirements for rosters. Festivals could not operate unless they had a peer-based festival on site, and I think we're the only place in the entire world where peers are a legislated requirement, and it's a recognition of all the amazing work that programs like this can do. So we've gone from a very small team to a team of 350 volunteers, 6 staff members. We do about 33 festival days. I'll be speaking a lot more about this at 4 o'clock, so I'm trying to keep my section short because I have 12 minutes to talk to you all. That's really what New South Wales' history is, a massive growth, but also we now have to work within regulation and legislation, which is awesome and difficult at the same time.
And part of your work at DanceWize New South Wales has been helping working with Harm Reduction Victoria DanceWize and helping expand that program. You did some really interesting work. I had the pleasure to be there with you in 2021, but would you tell us about what's going on and what you've done in Northern Territory as well?
So everyone gets a second date and maybe a third date later. So in 2019, Ardent, which is the peak body for non-government drug and alcohol organisations in the Northern Territory, reached out to DanceWize wanting to bring that model to them. We were meant to do a first pilot in 2020, but something kind of happened that year, and I'm kind of forgetting what that might be. So we basically worked with not only the Northern Territories, like NGO programs, the Northern Territory Music, and with DanceWize Victoria to basically pilot the DanceWize model up there. Now, there were a lot of challenges with working with multiple jurisdictions, time zones, legislation, but it was an absolute success. We found that peer work is truly universal in the work that we do because that community responded to us in the same way that we experience and feel at our festivals and programs that are run across Australia. It's now gone for a second year in 2022, which was also a success. And since then, by trying to find some additional funding, it's now moved as part of Music NT, which is their body which runs music festivals, into a program called All Good Project, or the All Good Project. So they'll be operating throughout the Northern Territory this year. They've got more of an experience in doing peer support at nightclubs focusing on gender-based violence, but are now expanding into the harm reduction area. So the model really works and can be taken to different areas. And if you're interested about developing and implementing one, come listen to me later.
Thank you, Erica. And the link to the All Good project in the Northern Territory is on the QR code as well. Next, we are going to the other side of the continent. We're going to WA. We're speaking with Joe Pania from Students for Sensible Drug Policy Australia. So Joe is the co-director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy Australia, a sessional academic of addiction studies and a mechanic. With lived experience in festival and nightlife settings, Joe is passionate about promoting harm reduction strategies in these environments. Joe's expertise in advocacy efforts are evidenced by his presentation of compelling evidence to the Western Australian Parliamentary Inquiry on alternative approaches to drug policy, influencing the committee's findings, and his work on the Safer Partying Initiative at universities. The Help to Handcuffs inquiry report is available there as well. Joe, tell us about WA.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, so a little bit more about SSDP Australia. Yes, we do submissions to governments. Yes, we do some education. But really our most impactful output is the Safer Partying Initiative. And it was really an initiative or an idea that we sort of appropriated from the American Students for Sensible Drug Policy, so hats off to them. Thank you for that. And basically what the Safer Partying Initiative does is we go out into universities and we present harm reduction seminars coupled with first aid advice around festival and party drugs, as well as, most importantly, giving out free reagent drug testing kits to anyone who attends. So we first set this off and did it sort of in a couple of ad hoc, once-off implementations at different universities here and there, but we found that we came up against a lot of backlash from the university administrative departments and governance bodies. So we've learnt a lot through those processes of doing it in different universities across the country, and we're trying to, basically those ad hoc run-throughs brought to light the Safer Partying Initiative program that we're currently working on and hoping to have well established at universities across the country. Yeah, all of the Safer Partying Initiative is building towards a full-fledged, either fixed site or on-site drug checking service at festivals. However, in WA, we don't have any peer-based harm reduction services for nightlife and festival settings at the moment. So that's something that we've also been working on in the background in WA, but currently the space is looking interesting. There's potentially 3 contenders in the space, so we might have something by the end of the year, we might not, but definitely before a full-fledged drug checking service is in operation in WA, we definitely need a peer-based harm reduction service for nightlife and festival atmospheres.
Thanks, Joe, and I hope that you end up establishing that. Well done. All right, now we're going to Tasmania and speaking with the lovely Amber Budden, a grassroots and underground harm reductionist. So Amber has been a dedicated festival harm reduction volunteer since 2015. Amber has developed and delivered GHB harm reduction training models for DanceWize Victoria volunteers and external alcohol and other drug professionals since 2018. Amber lived in Tasmania from 2020 till 2022, and she supported a grassroots initiative to establish harm reduction services for underground events in Tasmania and began to understand the challenges faced for these services. Amber, tell us about what was going on.
Hey everyone. Alright, let's see how that works. There we go. So I moved to Tasmania in 2020, and during that time I kind of came to meet like a community that was trying to get a kind of DanceWize related similar kind of initiative off the ground at small parties and events. At that time, so I met these people who were trying to get something organised for these small events, and essentially we kind of ran into a bunch of roadblocks. We really struggled to get the initiative off the ground just due to a lack of human resourcing and time. And kind of similar to WA, there's currently no government-funded or formal peer-led kind of harm reduction service in the state, so it's very much kind of starting from scratch. But meanwhile, like Tasmania as well has got some sporadic kind of larger events, so they've had the Falls Festival in Marion Bay, and they also have the Party in the Paddock, which is about once a year. These are events that are about 15,000 people compared to the average festival in Tasmania that is about much less than 2,000. So noticing the need for like a harm reduction service, on-site medical providers have actually started to step in and develop their own kind of partying safe initiatives. So St John's Ambulance and another company called ProMed have started developing these kind of volunteer operated safe spaces that tend to target the harm reduction element of festivals where they're not necessarily talking about drug education or safer drug use explicitly, but they're kind of focusing on keeping people hydrated and providing sunscreen, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting that they're stepping into this space, but it's not necessarily a peer-led initiative. It's quite an interesting development. So yeah, Party in the Paddock in 2023 was the first kind of one of these organisations, they had the Party Smart kind of program. They had a heavy level of engagement. They were actually noticing that there were less presentations at the medical tent due to dehydration or sunburn, which is a good outcome, but they're not necessarily willing to lean into the space of providing. Sorry, that's quite distracting. So essentially, they're not explicitly saying, oh, we're going to teach you about safe drug use. They're just like, just don't get sunburned. So it's kind of this interesting space, and like it's kind of trying to figure out how we can, work with these organisations. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Amber. Such a wealth of knowledge. Competing with that, I don't believe it's a fire alarm, so I think we're safe, but at the same time, I'm not sure what that is for. All right, so we've got one more jurisdiction that we're going to hear from a representative today. That's Mitch Lamb. He's from the Canberra Alliance for Harm Minimisation and Advocacy, or CARMA, in the ACT. So everyone's favourite jurisdiction for getting a few wins across the line, but there isn't government funding for peer-based harm reduction services at festivals yet. So Mitch is a peer educator from Canberra working for CARMA. Mitch hails from the electronic music community, and his company Canberra House Social delivers dance music events with a focus on patron safety and drug harm reduction. Mitch is also one of the peer educators at the CanTest drug checking service in Canberra. Mitch?
Thank you, Steph. It's wonderful to be here amongst lots of peers. So yes, I'm from Canberra. As you'll see on that lovely list in front of you, we are the most green, which means that we have a lot of nice drug policy things, and we also have a fantastic drug checking clinic, which might run counter to some people's feelings or perceptions about Canberra. Most people feel like it's a bit of a boring city. That's not true. We operate, a lot of music events across the capital, and because of the nature of our city being quite bushy, we're out in the bush, which means that the police, emergency services, they're typically not aware or not able to reach a lot of locations. So there's an inherent risk in a lot of the events that are run in Canberra. And being an event operator myself, I know for a fact that there's so many of these events where the risk is quite high. There is an identified need for a service, and the community sort of doesn't want to engage so much with emergency services, as you may understand. So we feel like the time is right for a peer service. So this sort of grey area is quite dangerous, but we've had a very exciting thing happen recently, which is the advent of CanTest. So CanTest allows anyone, completely free of charge, to come in and test their drugs. It's as a front of house service, which means that you are right there with the chemists and the peer workers discussing your results and being provided information about these drugs and how to use them safely if you are going to use, and how to sort of disseminate that information amongst the community. So week in, week out, Steph and I and the other peers and other workers at this site have long conversations with people in the community about how they can keep themselves safe and how they can keep others safe. And it's revolutionary, it really is. It's a broad cross-section of the community. It's not just partygoers, it's the entire spectrum of drug users in the ACT. But it means that we can get on the front foot with drug alerts. And that's something that's really lacking in Australia, is the access to data. So with this data, we're able to disseminate information out to the community. And I'll give you an example. Recently in Canberra, we've been seeing a lot of ketamine analogues. Not quite ketamine, not really studied. That information has been spreading amongst the community. And I find myself going to raves now and meeting people saying, oh, I had that can-ket the other day, which is not the correct name for it, I must add. And it was much longer lasting, and they're aware of the risks and dangers, and that's spreading by word of mouth. So it goes to show that the peer element here is really important. And as I said, there seems to be a demonstrated need from the community for such a thing. So last month, Steph and I, as part of a Karma and DanceWize Victoria initiative, went out to a music festival and delivered what we think is probably the first crowd care service in quite a while run by peers, if ever, potentially. Which was really great. So at that engagement, we were active for 6 hours, and we had 496 service engagements, and 295 of those were drug education sessions. I think that alone speaks for itself. We left halfway through the festival due to not having funding. If we stayed longer, I feel like that number would be huge. And we got really good reports back from the music festival and community.
So we've heard from all the representatives from different jurisdictions now, and you'll see that there's only, if you look at the map, there's actually only ongoing funding for festival-based harm reduction in New South Wales and Victoria. Everywhere else, it's either non-existent or only pilots that have been funded. So we're really excited to be here and seeing each other in person and network together. We have spent quite a bit of time networking in a group that Penny has been responsible for online and talking about information sharing with the Drug Alert. So Penny was the Prompt Response Network Lead and Emerging Drugs Research Fellow at NCCRED from 2020 till 2023. Tell us about that project and the potentials it offers for the groups of festival harm reductionists here to network more and information share more.
Thanks, Steph. Good to be back again. So a few years ago, the Australian federal government, through the Department of Health, recognised the need to share information about new and emerging drugs as they appear all across the country through all of these different services and different initiatives, answering long-standing calls from all parts of the sector to set up a national early warning system. This initiative, called the Prompt Response Network, was funded through the National Centre for Clinical Research on Emerging Drugs, a research consortium here in Australia, and I signed up to the role of project lead to set up this project in late 2020 after I'd handed over SSDP Australia and was wrapping up my PhD. I've been hugely privileged to work alongside a lot of the people here through SSDP, Pill Testing Australia, Harm Reduction Victoria, at the pilots of DanceWize in New South Wales, NT as well, and I knew that the only way to set up the PRN to actually work properly in Australia was to do it alongside people who use drugs and co-design the project that way. So we formed a guidance group for the project, which funded the time and contributions of all of the peer state and territory and ABLE, the peak body agencies, and their work on setting up the project with us. But to hear how we did that alongside not just the peer groups, other NGOs, clinicians, toxicologists, academics as well, please come back to the dialogue space at 10:30 on Wednesday, where we'll be talking about the PRN and further processes for how we disseminate drug alerts in Australia. So thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much, Penny. And I think if you look at the map, it might only be New South Wales and Victoria that has funded harm reduction services at festivals, but in every jurisdiction, except for at the moment South Australia, there is quite a thriving community-led harm reduction offering. Thank you as well, Andy, for letting us eat into your workshop time. And please click the QR code so you can connect with all the speakers from today. Thank you so much.